So we're here with the Henderson family to talk about how to make your own sushi. And I'll just very briefly introduce them because they're going to do a lot of introducing themselves, I think. So we have Yukari, Keith, and Erika Henderson. And they run a cafe just outside Kew Gardens called Café Yukari. Before you all rush down there tomorrow, it's apparently only open at weekends. So, yeah. Actually, my son was in Kew this afternoon, so I said, "Oh, why don't you pop in?" But it's just as well. Well, maybe he tried, but and failed. Well, obviously, Café Yukari is named after Yukari over there, well, I've got the same notes that you all have read, but her hobby is food, and she spent all her salary eating food. But her other hobby is music. So actually, the cafe hosts regular classical music concerts, and Yukari plays the piano. And Erika, is also interested in food. Everyone's interested in food here, and is a part-time biscuit decorating instructor. Anyone looking for biscuit decorating courses, you know where to go. Fun designs that can be done on biscuits. And I don't actually have anything here in my notes about Keith, but he's going to tell you himself, presumably about himself a little and about the cafe. So I will stand down and leave them to it.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our sushi event today. Let me introduce us, as we've been introduced. My name is Keith Henderson. 17 years experience travelling to and working in Japan has given me my understanding of Japan and especially its cuisine. We have been running our Japanese cafe restaurant in front of Kew Gardens underground station for 7 years. I first met iced coffee in Marunouchi, Tokyo. Cafes are everywhere in Japan. And in between project meetings, I would drop in for refreshment. My work was with the international banks in Tokyo, using or upgrading to our British company's banking software system. And Tokyo is where I met my Japanese wife, Yukari. Now let us fast forward 20 years. After returning to base in London, now, with 2 teenagers, several things happened. I hit retirement earlier than planned. Our daughter and son and my wife followed each other to university. And we embarked on starting a small family business. Decent iced coffee was non-existent in England. Few restaurants served authentic Japanese food. Yukari had also shipped back her Boston grand piano. She was itching for a performance space to share classical music concerts with Japanese friends living here. After 2 years of searching London, we found a run-down Edwardian former chemist's shop in Kew that had potential, including that all-important performance space. I could flex my younger self's architect's ambitions. However, with the help of proper architects and a diverse crew of builders, we gutted and rebuilt it into our atelier and cafe, opening in October 2017. We learnt on the job. Our staff are mainly friends the Japanese wives I described earlier. Later, professional staff Chie Sensei, who unfortunately is not able to be with us today, joined, bringing her Fukushima experience. Her father was a fishmonger, and in the evening the shop became a sushi restaurant. Chie-san has taught us the proper ways to slice a raw fish. We are able to source sashimi quality fish through a Japanese supplier in the UK. Our menu expanded. Do you like sushi? Sushi is popular around the world. This was hardly the case 30 years ago, when raw fish was considered an acquired taste. In the UK, you can now buy ready-made sushi everywhere. It has become a popular fast food. Also, many British people can use hashi chopsticks now. However, there's a problem with ready-made sushi. The rice is cold because, by UK food and safety regulations, sushi has to be kept cold in the fridge. Eating sushi made to order in a restaurant is a much better experience. The downside is you can expect a bill 3 to 5 times higher than the ready-made one. However, we think we offer good value at Café Yukari. Today, we'd like to introduce a simple and easy way to make sushi at home. The basic idea is to use ingredients you can find at a supermarket. Essential materials are short-grained rice, japonica or sushi rice is okay, vinegar, sugar, and vegetable or sushi grade fish. The examples in this picture are vegetable sushi. So this is the aubergine, spring onion, mooli, of daikon from Japan, and this is pepper with that's ginger, and I shouldn't give the secrets away, but and this one is miso, I think, white miso. Right. So at this point, I'd like to hand over to our daughter Erika to tell you more about sushi and explain how to make it.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll go back into the history of sushi first. Okay, history of sushi. It all started in Southeast Asia. So sushi was originally used as a method of preserving fish in Southeast Asia. River fish was salted for a few months, then it was covered with raw rice, which raised the acidity ready for lactofermentation. The whole fermentation process took several months to a year, and the liquefied rice was discarded afterwards, leaving the fish that were ready to eat. The lactofermentation creates umami through breaking down the meat, which creates a lot of amino acids that we experience as tasting really good. And this flavor is different from just pickling the fish in vinegar. And the preservation practice was common in the 2nd century in Southeast Asia. This method traveled through China and ended up in Japan by the 8th century. Now, you could say that's over 600 years, but try to imagine how hard it must be to convince your neighbor to try this food. Hey, trust me, you should try this food. Like, look, all you need to do is get your salted fish, put it in your precious rice, and then you'll get something really amazing. Okay, so how long do I need to keep it in for? Several months? Okay, then surely it must taste good. Well, I mean, it will smell absolutely rotten. It's absolutely sour, but it kind of grows on you. You should try it. Just trust me, just wait a year. Okay. So you could see like the process of acquiring the food culture would have taken a lot of time, not just through the distance, but through the flavor as well. Feeling it took too long and wasted the rice, the Japanese evolved a method to shorten the fermentation by the 15th century, eating the fish and the sour rice semi-fermented after a month. So again, there's another several hundred years that went by until we finally reached into the process where we're semi-fermenting this. And this was called narezushi. Narezushi remains all over Japan in various forms. It still is throughout this modern times. By 17th century Edo period, which was the modern day Tokyo, a prototype of a modern sushi, hayazushi, literally fast sushi, was developed. Because they finally made vinegar by that time, vinegar was still a bit more precious. They added the vinegar straight to the rice, and the fermentation was dropped completely, providing a fast food style sushi for the working class Edo people. These Edo people were distinctly remembered as people who are always in hurry, just fast, 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 work, work, work. And I'm sure a lot of people in London relate to that. Eat on the go sushi became very popular. The rice was 2 to 3 times as larger than it is now. People grabbed their sushi with their hands and ate it as it is. Hand wipes were also not a thing back then. But conveniently, there just happened to be cloth curtains that were hanging in front of the shops, which were sort of banners. So you could imagine as they went off, they just kind of went like that. And well, I would say food hygiene wasn't really much of a thing back then. So the fish was either cooked, marinated with flavors such as soy sauce, or pickled with salt and vinegar for a little bit of health and safety reasons. This meant they didn't need to dab the sushi in sauce. The fish were supplied from Tokyo Bay often, which was still clean at that time. Now, you may have just thought, but without the fridge, wouldn't eating sushi be a poisoning risk? Food poisoning risk? Well, yes, absolutely it was. Anisakis, I'm not sure if anyone see those tiny little white worms that are wiggling in like full fish that sometimes comes in supermarkets. They must have had a party with the rise of raw sushi. But once again, food hygiene and safety were merely recommendations. So if you fail to pickle your mackerel that well, just a little bit of a weak vinegar, you would find yourself having a stomachache. But that didn't stop the people from eating sushi. And so, common topping back then were mackerel, squid, prawn, tuna, sea bream, saltwater eels, anago, which is like a tiny eel, and other types of silver fish like mackerel that just shines. And there's this tiny fish that is apparently called salangitai. I'm sure you wouldn't know. We don't actually eat it now, to name a few. So what was the most popular sushi? Interestingly, soy marinated tuna wasn't the Edo favorite, and they preferred either the white meat or the silverfish meat, which was usually pickled in vinegar. Now, here's a question for all of you. Fatty tuna, which is considered a modern day luxury, was discarded for pets. Can anyone guess why? Anybody want to take a guesstimate? No? Anybody? Yes?
Did the fat become rancid by any chance?
Yes, that's correct. So even in the modern day sushi, it's always the fatty parts that go off first. And the reason why people didn't like their soy marinated tuna that much was because that was the only one that came from the sea. And for the fish to be fished and travel all the way up, it took several days. By that time, it would have smelled pretty fishy. Even in our cafe, when we get our salmon that we need to cut up into pieces, we make sure we cut out the belly fat part first, because that part tends to start smelling much quicker than the rest of the parts. Okay. So without refrigeration, fatty parts go off very quickly. And alternatively, the most expensive sushi was eggs. As a Buddhist country, eating meat was forbidden during the Edo period. But two-legged creatures just started to get a whole pass, and so chickens started to get a bit more popular, but they were still rare, and therefore eggs were considered a luxury. There's also another theory that because in the Shinto religion, chickens were considered a bit more sacred, but it didn't really stop people from eating it. And also, rabbits were considered two-legged because it stands on its two legs, apparently. So that got a whole pass too. Okay, so here I have a sample of what Edo sushi may have looked like. 1 second. So, oops. Okay, I'm not sure if you could see from here, but this is the size of the sushi back then. This is the egg, the most expensive one you could get back then, and the modern day one. Now, does anybody here have a large enough jaw that will want to come to the front to demonstrate eating this sushi? Anybody? No. Yes. I would love to have one brave person. Yes, please. So, yeah, well done. Thank you very much. So, here you go. Yeah, please come up to the front. And so, also this is what the egg sushi would have tasted like as well. So, take your time eating it, and once you have eaten it, please give us your reports.
Does it have sugar?
Mm-hmm.
Or not?
Yeah, it's huge. That was nice.
We should have prepared some water as well. I'm sorry, I should have prepared water, but
already.
yeah. Okay, so how is the flavor?
Yeah, it does seem like there's sugar in it.
Yes.
I never really thought about like egg sushi. I mean, it does taste. The rice tastes kind of similar to what I'd expect, I suppose. The egg is kind of like not quite like an omelette, but it's quite solid. Like there's no gaps of air in the middle of it, so it's maybe kind of reminds me of like tofu or that kind of texture, but like of an omelette flavor.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Feel free to have some water, and once you're ready, feel free to take that and have a seat. And yes, this is to wipe your hands if you need.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. So, actually, the egg roll there right now. The egg part, the recipe hasn't changed much in the modern era. It has sugar, dashi, salt, and yeah, it does taste a little bit like pudding. But the rice part, it actually has less vinegar, 50% less vinegar, but instead it has 3 times as much salt inside. This was just another form of preservation, but I think because of the sweet egg, it may not have been as easy to notice. But if you were eating the fish on top, you would have noted it was a lot more saltier. And that's also the reason why they didn't need to put soy sauce on it. So yes, okay. So now we come down to our modern era, where we have various local variations. The first one is the Edomae sushi from Tokyo, which is here. And Edomae sushi is the modern form of hayazushi, which is half the size as what he is eating now. And on top of that, we call it nigiri sushi now. We don't really call it Edomae sushi. But you could see the selection of ingredients on there is quite similar to what we had in the past. And next one, masuzushi from Toyama, which is all the way here. And this is pickled trout salmon sushi. So you could see here, it looks like a compressed cake form, which it literally is. They compress the pickled trout salmon into the vinegar rice. So it tastes a lot more chewy than the delicate nigiri sushi. And it's good for preservation because it's pickled on top too. It's wrapped in bamboo leaves to give a little bit of a fragrance as well. Sabazushi from Kyoto, it's a similar idea as the masuzushi, just a different fish. It's saba, mackerel that is pickled, and you could see like this type of silver fish would have been a bit more popular in a different area where you could get more saba. And this one again, they would have compressed it, and usually it tends to have kelp on the surface just to add an extra flavor to it. But the idea is the same, to preserve it quite well with its compressed preservation. And that's Kyoto. For Osaka, the hakozushi, which Osaka is close to Kyoto, but they tend to have different cultures. Now, box sushi, I personally haven't seen it before, and apparently it's a more fancier variation of sushi because fish don't usually come in cute little cube forms. So there's a lot of scraps that you really need to use to make this. And so, yeah, I think it's just a slightly modern variation that budded in Osaka. Finally, inakazushi, which means countryside sushi, which is not fish anymore. It's braised mountain vegetables, and you may probably can guess that there's a lot of mountainous areas. If people didn't have fish there, then they used vegetable instead. Now, people who recognize the Japanese food a bit more may notice that the vegetable sushi here is a lot more like nimono, which is vegetable braised in strong soy and sugar to make it last a little longer. We have here konnyaku, which is made with the powder of mountain potato starch. Shiitake mushroom. This is bamboo shoots. Myoga, which is some strong flavor pickled. And I think these are other pickled somethings. So I'm not really sure what they are. Again, I actually haven't seen this myself. And also, I don't think it has too much relation to the modern yasai vegetable sushi, because there's no real evolution from this to the fresh sushi. This is just something localized. So these are the local variations in Japan, but the nigiri sushi is the most well-known one. Okay, how to make sushi? Well, first of all, I'd like to say in the UK, the most popular locally sourced fish topping is Scottish farm salmon. We tend to use sushi grade fish in our cafe. so that we ensure there are no parasites or harmful pathogens that could cause food poisoning when it is eaten raw. Originally, the Japanese didn't use salmon as sushi due to the salmon variety containing parasites. It's quite common with river fish. But due to the rise of refrigeration and farming techniques, it has become a staple sushi topping. I also think it was partly to do with Norway just coming in and introducing their exports salmon. And currently, farmed Scottish salmon can be considered sushi grade, but most sea-caught fish are frozen once so that the parasites tend to die. So all tuna tends to be frozen. I personally think Scottish farmed salmon is superior to the Atlantic salmon variety you can get in Japan because it's a lot more fatty, but that's more of a preference. Yes, whatever you like. If you have trout salmon sushi, it has less fat and the meat is a lot more tighter and it has a slightly more river flavor to it. But yeah, those are just different salmon varieties. So today I would like to introduce a simple recipe for making vegetable sushi or anything you can buy in the store. Because the main ingredient is rice, it is gluten-free, lactose-free, and it is very easy to make a vegan version, depending on the topping. So here we go. We've got, for the base, 2 cups of rice, and the mixture to make sushi vinegar is the 4:3:2 ratio of vinegar, sugar, and salt. Although I say 4:3:2, you could see that it's 4 tablespoons vinegar, 3 tablespoons sugar, but 2 teaspoons of salt. I just thought the number is a lot more easier to remember, but don't put 2 tablespoons of salt. You'll probably have a lot more problems in your blood later on. And so, first of all, we tend to cook the rice. As my dad was saying in the beginning, there are certain types of rice that are more preferred. The variety is either called sasanishiki or koshihikari varieties, but you can use like any type of short grain rice, which tends to be glutinous in East Asia. It just has a slightly different texture. When you buy it from the supermarkets, they usually don't say sasanishiki or koshihikari. They tend to put their own subtle brand name on it instead. So it may be a bit hard to choose from, but as long as it says sushi rice or short grain rice, you'll probably be able to make a shape out of it. Brown rice isn't as suitable because it doesn't stick as well together. It's not impossible, but it's just a lot more difficult. So we'll just get the recipe for cooking rice with the rice cooker or pot. Just find any recipe online. But some people like to use slightly less water than what it is advised on the recipe. Like the rice cooker, there's a line. We tend to pour in slightly less water than the line because the default rice tends to come out a bit more soft. And for sushi rice, it's easier to shape when you have a bit more firmer rice. So after we make the rice, we combine these 3 mixtures together. Now, you don't need to worry too much about the granules for the sugar and the salt because once the rice is ready, we are going to pour it in whilst the rice is still piping hot. So once the rice is ready, we'll pour this in and just fluff up the rice so that it mixes in quite well. And it's a lot more easier to shape the rice whilst it's still a bit warm. The cooler it gets, the harder it is to form the shape. You can do it, but it's just harder. So once you have your rice, I tend to pick up a bit of rice and you want to make it into a 5 centimeter oblong shape. For me, that's around 3 finger worth of size. So you don't want to get out of the 5 centimeter. I use that as a measurement. When you don't have a ruler, people may have a 2.5 finger length worth, but that's how you get a feeling of the measurement. You don't want to make it really oval shape. You want to make it oblong, like rectangular, to say. And so you kind of mold it into the shape. Then you can throw on any sort of vegetable topping you want. Topping ideas. So these are previous examples that we made before. You could see from the right side, leek, shiitake mushrooms, raw courgette, raw carrot with a bit of semi-sun-dried tomato. This is another semi-sun-dried tomato. Baby spinach, eggplant, broccoli, and grilled red peppers. Now, some of these don't work as well as other ones because, as you can see, this broccoli, it was so bulky, it didn't actually balance that well. So it's actually being supported by these two. And the baby spinach as well. I was thinking some forms of spinach, they have large leaves, so you could wrap it around, but baby spinach was too small. It wasn't possible to do that. So the flavor's still good, but it's just anything that is flat is a lot easier. And yes, also apart from vegetarian ones, you could use smoked salmon, sea sticks, or eggs as well. Those are easy to obtain from the supermarket. And yes, so you may have noticed like some of the ones look they're grilled, as big as they are. Anything raw, sometimes you can use hard vegetables like raw mooli, raw courgette, raw carrots. So to match with the texture of the rice, you need to sort of soften it up. And usually you do that by pickling it in salt or some stock flavoring, which is what we did with these two. So it's a bit more flaccid and wraps around well. Okay, so topping flavorings. Now, if we go back to the previous slide, you could see some of these have toppings on them. Some of them are just decorative, some of them enhance the flavor. And the very basic one is just plain grilled vegetables, and then you just put it on the sushi rice and dab it in soy sauce. It's simple, it tastes good, nothing wrong with that. So this is the very basic form. You could also just simply put a dab of miso on top, which also adds a bit of saltiness. But if you want to be a bit more creative, there's a way to start enhancing the flavor of vegetables, because naturally vegetables don't have that much umami in them. It's not like fish or meat where the ingredient itself gives that amazing flavor. So the next form is to have saltiness and sweetness combined. Teriyaki, which is like sugar soy, is one way. We could have sugar miso. So the previous one, like if you just kind of mix the sugar miso 50-50, it gives a little bit of a sweet salty mixture, that just a little bit of a dab, and it kind of makes the flavor more complex. This is because semi-sun-dried tomatoes tend to have that salty, sour flavor already. That's also one method to complicate the flavor. We also have something a bit more unorthodox here, cream cheese, but it actually went well with sun-dried tomatoes. Yeah, this one looks a bit unorthodox, but it does work. Over here, we've got ginger. Ginger only tends to work well with eggplants, but yes, it's just a nice addition. And the third way of changing the flavor is to add umami. So having like a hard vegetable and dunking it in the kelp stock or vegetable broth, and then waiting for like several hours, it becomes flaccid. So the mouli itself will have the flavor inside. Finally, sourness, like vinegar. You don't usually use vinegar on its own. You only use it as a combination with saltiness and sweetness. So order is like, you can easily just use saltiness, salty sweet, or salt sweet sour. In Japanese cooking, we tend to have tsuyu, which is like a pre-made concentrated stock of sweet soy and dashi, which is the umami. And that is used a lot in udon noodles and soba noodles. So if you actually have this, you could either just use this to dab the eggplants in or the courgettes in, or you could do 50-50 vinegar and tsuyu to give that a whole complete set and make it complicated. So some of the flavors, I think this one, I used a bit of tsuyu inside. Yeah, this one also tsuyu vinegar, but pretty much anything works. Simple works as well. So that's how you can use your yasai sushi.